In this world full of noise, where everyone is eager to speak, few truly understand the power of silence. We live in a time where opinions are shared before thoughts are complete, and words are often used more to fill the air than to convey meaning. Yet, if we look closely at the lives of the wisest people in history, we find a common thread. They spoke less, listened more, and understood the world in ways most people never do. There is a story, simple yet profound, that reveals the true strength hidden in silence. Once, in a small village, there lived a young man named Arjun. He was known for his quick wit and sharp tongue. In every gathering, Arjun was the loudest voice, always eager to share his thoughts, interrupt others, and prove his point. People admired his intelligence, but many found it difficult to have a real conversation with him. He rarely listened, and when he did, it was only to prepare his next argument. One day, an old sage visited the village. The villagers respected the sage for his wisdom and calm presence. Arjun, curious and confident, decided to meet the sage. He believed he could impress the wise man with his knowledge and clever words. As Arjun approached him, he saw the sage sitting quietly under a tree, eyes closed, breathing slowly, surrounded by a peaceful silence. Arjun greeted the sage and immediately began talking about his achievements, his ideas, and his opinions on every subject. The sage listened patiently, nodding occasionally, but said nothing. Minutes passed, and Arjun continued, his words flowing like a river in flood. Finally, he paused, expecting praise, or at least a response. The sage opened his eyes and smiled gently. "You have a sharp mind, Arjun," he said softly, "but tell me, what have you learned from listening today?" Arjun was taken aback. He had not listened at all. He had only spoken. The sage continued, "Words are powerful, but silence is even more so. In silence, we hear not just the words of others, but the whispers of our own heart and the lessons of the world around us." Arjun felt a strange discomfort. For the first time, he wondered if his constant talking was keeping him from understanding others and even himself. The sage invited Arjun to spend a day with him in silence. "Observe, listen, and speak only when necessary," the sage instructed. Arjun hesitated, but agreed, curious about what he might discover. The next morning, Arjun joined the sage at sunrise. They walked through the village, visited the fields, and sat by the river. The sage spoke little, only when needed, and spent most of the time observing, listening to the sounds of nature, and watching people go about their day. Arjun struggled at first, feeling the urge to fill the silence with words, but gradually he began to notice things he had never seen before. As the hours passed, Arjun's mind, once restless and noisy, began to quiet down. He noticed the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant laughter of children playing, and the soft murmur of the river flowing nearby. He saw how the farmers communicated with just a glance or a nod, how the birds sang without words, and how the world seemed to move in harmony when there was no need to speak. For the first time, Arjun realized how much he had missed by always being the one to talk. He saw the pain in the eyes of an old woman sitting alone by her hut, the silent worry on a mother's face as she watched her child, and the quiet determination in the hands of a young man working in the fields. These were stories that words could not capture, truths that only silence could reveal. At midday, the sage and Arjun sat beneath a large banyan tree. The sage finally broke the silence. Arjun, what have you learned so far? Arjun thought for a moment before answering. I have seen more in these few hours of silence than I have in years of talking. I noticed things I never paid attention to before. I felt connected to the world in a way I never have. The sage nodded. Silence is not emptiness. It is a space where understanding grows. When we are silent, we give ourselves the chance to truly observe, to feel, and to understand. Most people fear silence because they think it means nothing is happening. But in truth, silence is where the most important things begin. Arjun remembered all the times he had spoken over others, eager to prove himself right, and how often he had missed the real meaning behind their words. He realized that by speaking less, he could actually understand more, not just about others, but about himself as well. The sage continued, there is a reason why the greatest teachers, leaders, and thinkers in history valued silence. They knew that wisdom is not found in endless talking, but in careful listening and thoughtful reflection. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. When you listen more, you learn things that cannot be learned in any other way. Arjun felt a deep sense of humility. He understood now that silence was not a weakness, but a strength. It was a tool for learning, for connecting, and for growing as a person. He realized that the people he admired most were not those who spoke the loudest, but those who listened the deepest. As the sun began to set, Arjun and the sage walked back to the village. The world seemed different to Arjun now, richer, fuller, and more alive. He felt grateful for the lesson he had learned, and he promised himself to carry the power of silence with him wherever he went. That evening, as Arjun sat quietly outside his home, he reflected on the day's experience. The village, which once seemed ordinary and predictable, now appeared vibrant and full of hidden stories. He realized that every person he met had a world within them, and that world could only be discovered through patience and silence. The urge to speak, to fill every pause with words, had faded. In its place was a new curiosity, a desire to listen, to observe, and to truly understand. Days turned into weeks, and Arjun began to practice silence in his daily life. He listened more to his family, his friends, and even strangers. He noticed that when he spoke less, people opened up to him more. They shared their worries, their dreams, and their joys. Arjun found that he could comfort others not just with advice, but with his presence and his willingness to listen. He became known not for his clever words, but for his thoughtful silence. One day, a heated argument broke out in the village square. Two neighbors were shouting, each trying to prove the other wrong. The crowd gathered, everyone adding their own opinions, making the situation worse. Arjun watched quietly, remembering the sage's lesson. Instead of joining the noise, he waited for a moment of calm. Then, in a gentle voice, he asked both men to sit with him in silence for a few minutes. At first, they resisted, but the calmness in Arjun's presence was hard to ignore. Slowly, the shouting faded, and a peaceful silence settled over the group. In that silence, the anger and pride that had fueled the argument began to dissolve. The two neighbors looked at each other, realizing how little they had actually listened to one another. With Arjun's guidance, they spoke quietly, shared their feelings, and found a solution that satisfied them both. The villagers were amazed. They saw that silence had achieved what words could not. Arjun's life changed in many ways. He became a source of wisdom and comfort for those around him. People sought his advice not because he always had the right answers, but because he listened with an open heart. He learned that silence is not just the absence of sound, but the presence of understanding. It is a space where true connection happens, where empathy grows, and where wisdom is born. The story of Arjun spread beyond the village, inspiring others to discover the power of silence in their own lives. People realized that in a world full of noise, those who master the art of silence hold a rare and precious strength. They understand more, judge less, and live with greater peace. So, the next time you feel the urge to speak, remember Arjun's journey. Pause, listen, and let silence do its work. You may find that in those quiet moments, you understand more than words could ever express. The power of silence is not in what you say, but in what you choose to hear.